That means it's the Thursday Tojo podcast. This is actually take 2 for the podcast because it's actually drilling within our flat, so we're having to press stop every time the drilling happens. So hopefully we're going to have a straight run through today, even if this is a little bit shorter than usual.
If you hear drilling in the background, don't worry, because today we're talking about how we hack the happy chemicals. And we're going to have happy chemicals no matter what happens today.
Yes, so we're actually going to be looking at what happens in the body when we're happy and full of joy. And I know sometimes it feels that to get in that happy state or to get into that joyful state can sometimes be a lot more hard work than what it is to get into the opposite side of the coin.
But in actual fact, most of our happiness and our sadness that you're going to experience today are simply a result of squirts of various chemicals that your brain is squirting into your system. And how do we deal with those? And the great news is you don't have to go to the pharmacy and get drugs in order to make you feel happy, because your brain actually produces all of the self-same drugs in much more powerful amounts and much more condensed quantities than you can get from the pharmacy. So if we can learn how to hack the happy chemicals in our brain, how to get our brain to release the right chemicals at the right time, then we have access to the most amazing pharmacy. It's absolutely free, and it's not going to cause you internal damage in the same way as medications often do.
I think it's all a matter of responses, isn't it? So one thing will trigger another,
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
What comes first, the chicken or the egg, right?
Yeah.
So like you pat a dog because you love dogs, then the chemical reaction is released. And then because the chemical reaction is released, you want to pat the dog more because it makes you happier. Anyway,
and this is one of the big questions in psychology. In psychology now, for instance, in depression, is depression a chemical imbalance, or does the chemical imbalance cause depression? Are the two? Does a feeling of being down suppress the feel-good chemicals, or does the lack of feel-good chemicals cause you to feel down? And the answer is yes. Yes, absolutely.
To both.
It's both and this is the whole thing. So all we have to do is plug in at any one point on this circle, and we're able to start correcting and changing things. And so we're going to be talking today about 4 chemicals. Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins.
Don't switch off at this point, people. This is a real like kind of breakthrough one today.
Now you've got to understand how the brain is constructed. The core of the brain is the limbic system. The limbic system, if you like, is our animal brain. We share it with all the animals, and what that does is that the job of that part of the brain is simply to keep you alive and to get you to reproduce. And so it releases these 4 chemicals, dopamine, endorphins, oxytocin, and serotonin, in order to goad you and to direct you into getting those things to happen. So it will release oxytocin, the love hormone, to get you to have babies. It will release dopamine to get you to go out and hunt. It will release endorphins to mask pain. And we'll talk about those in a moment. But you need to understand that these are chemical reactions that are happening without we have got nothing to do with it.
We've got no control over it.
No control.
No.
It's our limbic brain, which is not conscious.
Survival, isn't it?
It's a subconscious part of our brain, survival mechanism, and that's there, and it's squirting these 4 chemicals in to manipulate us into certain effects. So, for instance, when you're hungry, you become irrational.
All the time.
We become irrational when we're out hungry because our limbic system, our animal brain, is squirting various chemicals that make us want to go hunting for food, and that generates aggression and so on and so forth. Now, the thing that makes us different from animals is that the limbic system is very, very small, and on top of that, we've got this thing called the cortex, which is our rational brain, our thinking brain. And do you ever find that there's almost like between these 2 brains, there's 2 of you, there's the part of you, the animal part of you, and then there's the rational part of you, and they're always fighting each other.
Yeah, they feel like they got like 2 people in your one one body, I guess, isn't it?
You know you're not going to die if you don't eat within the next 5 minutes, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, but sometimes you feel like you are going to die.
Yeah, totally.
If you don't eat in the next 5 minutes.
And that's because the cortex and the limbic system are fighting each other. The limbic system is saying, you're going to die, you need to go out and hunt. Your rational system, your cortex is saying, it's not a big deal, it's okay. The thing is ultimately the limbic system is going to win.
Mm-hmm.
It's been around for a lot longer. It's got a lot more tricks up its sleeve. And most of all, it has access to the pharmacy.
I guess it's the instinct part of you.
Yes, it is.
The instinct to eat.
Yeah.
That gut feeling, as it were.
Yeah.
What people call gut feelings.
Yeah, we often talk about feelings from the gut or feelings from the head.
Yeah.
It's really these two parts of the brain working.
Mm.
So let's talk a bit more about these 4 chemicals. We really need to understand them in order to be able to hack them. And the first is dopamine. You've probably heard people talking about this sort of stuff before.
Yeah.
Dopamine is the reward chemical. It's the little squirt of dopamine that your limbic system releases as a reward for finding something. So let me give you an example. You're a primitive person and you're out searching, foraging for food, and you see a sprout of something coming through the ground, and you dig and you find that sprout leads to a root which is edible. Your dopamine is released and gives you this little dopamine hit of, oh, look what I've found. I've found food. And next time you're hungry, you will go looking, not for the root, you'll go looking for the dopamine hit.
Mm.
Now, your cortex will go looking for the root. Say, I think I need to go and look for a root which was green on the top and yellow on the bottom and about this, red, da, 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 da. But actually, the thing that's going to motivate you is your limbic system offering you a hit. It's like a drug dealer. And it's
if you find something.
If you find that root again,
now,
I'm going to give you another hit of dopamine.
Does this mean that men lack from dopamine hits because they rarely find things?
That's another subject, I think.
Is this an issue?
I think that's another...
Where is this? Where is this? It's under your nose. Yeah, so dopamine can also be released like when you've completed something, but also through laughter.
Yeah, this is common of all the chemicals.
Yeah, this is the one common thread through all these chemicals, is that when you have a jolly good laugh, all the chemicals are released all at once.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's good afterwards.
Somebody said, I saw the other day, they said, why is it that everything I like is either fattening or illegal? And let me give you an example for that. So donuts, why do donuts trigger happy chemicals?
Donuts.
And donuts trigger dopamine. And the reason is because fat and sugar are really scarce in nature.
Right.
They're really common in our society, but in nature, fat and sugar are really unusual. They're really rare because they're such condensed forms of energy.
You rarely see animals on a sugar high, I guess, unless you've actually got access to sugar canes.
I mean, you're looking, as a hunter-gatherer, you are looking for energy. That's the primary thing. If you don't get energy, you're going to die.
Yeah.
And so things which are calorie dense give you a huge dopamine hit because, my goodness, if somebody's found this little weedy root and somebody's found a load of sugar cane, there's a fatty piece of meat. That fatty piece of meat is going to give you much more energy for much longer than a wizened root. And which is why primitive societies, they value fat. The fat on the meat is more important to them than the meat that's on the fat.
Yeah.
Whereas our society, because its scarcity isn't a problem, we value the meat. And that's our cortex overriding our limbic system. Mm-hmm. If left to itself, our limbic system would demand we eat the meat. So donuts trigger happy chemicals because fat and sugar are scarce in nature. And here's something which has both fat and sugar. Whop! Your limbic system gives you a great big dopamine hit for it. This is the same reason McDonald's gives you a dopamine hit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the second, so dopamine is about reward for finding things.
Number one. Number two.
The second chemical is the endorphins.
The dolphins.
The endorphins are the bliss of pain relief. So imagine you're an animal and you're out hunting and something starts hunting you, and a lion attacks you, and a lion scratches you and starts mauling you. You've got to get away, but you've been brutally injured. What are you going to do? Now, if all you're aware of is the pain, you're going to just lie down and die.
Yeah.
But your body then releases huge amounts of endorphins into your system, which are natural painkillers, which mask the pain, which enable you to do incredible things. So there's been stories in the First World War and Second World War where somebody would have a leg or a limb entirely blown off, but they'll still carry on fighting because they haven't realised they've lost that limb. There's so many endorphins in their system that they're not even feeling the pain. You see,
it's a surge of adrenaline that happens at that point.
And let me come to adrenaline in a moment.
Okay, sorry, I jumped ahead of myself.
So what endorphins do is they mask pain for a while to enable an injured creature to reach safety. So that's the purpose of it. Now, good you said about adrenaline. Adrenaline isn't one of these chemicals, but adrenaline is an amplifier.
Magnify.
It amplifies the effects of all the other neurochemicals.
Sure.
So if you have a donut, okay, that's great, but if it's your birthday party, there's huge adrenaline surging in your system at the same time. Not only is the donut more delicious at that point, you know, some food just tastes better at different times when your senses are more aroused. Right? But the donut itself then creates these neural pathways that makes you want them more and more because of the presence of adrenaline. So endorphins mask the pain for a while. Now here's the interesting thing. As an animal, all it's looking to do is mask your physical pain to get you away. It does not mask social pain.
Right.
Endorphins can't mask social pain.
What we're talking about, emotions.
Emotional pain. Emotional pain is a fairly new thing in the overall scheme of things. Because the most important thing is just survival. But now, because we're surviving, we're able to look at our emotional pain and say, okay, how do we deal with that? We can't deal with it with a rush of endorphins, which is why taking painkillers for emotional pain is ultimately counterproductive. It's not going to work so much.
So what are the things that actually sparks the endorphin chemical?
No, laughter again, obviously. Natural pain, because pain will release it. So for instance, if you go to the gym and you work out really, really hard, you're creating pain in your body. And your body will start releasing endorphins to enable you to get through that. So if you watch somebody who's new to working out, they will get to a point where the exercise starts feeling painful and they'll put the bar down. Somebody who's been working out for years will feel the pain and will carry on and will push through and push through and push through. The reason they can do that is because they've got very, very good at releasing the endorphins. Their body has got used to it and releases these vast rushes of painkillers, and they can carry on just working out with a level of pain which would cause somebody else to put down the bar and go home. Laughing, watching a comedy obviously can do that, exercise and so on. So cool. Natural painkiller.
Number 3.
Third chemical is oxytocin. Oxytocin.
The love hormone. People are
just
the
a love machine.
Oh, we're singing 2 different songs.
We've got to get our act together, mate.
Anyway, so oxytocin. So when it kind of like creates the lovey-dovey feeling, as it were. So I've mentioned before, like playing with a dog, that creates the oxytocin chemical in the brain. Because, like, who doesn't love dogs? You know, they have this almost insatiable desire to have fuss and attention, and so they can just be there forever whilst you're rubbing their belly, and then you're kind of like feeding off each other.
That's why people who are ill in hospitals
Dog therapy.
Dog therapy is really big, and it really
Animal
works
therapy,
because animal therapy creates oxytocin.
Yeah.
People with horses are the same.
Yeah.
Horses there's an incredible oxytocin response between human beings and other certain types of animals.
Totally
so horses, and because riding a horse is a very, very tactile thing, anything which is tactile.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons why loneliness is such a huge problem in the elderly population is that if you speak to most older people, they'll say one of the great problems is that nobody touches them anymore.
Yeah.
There's a huge lack of touch.
Connection,
and connection. Perhaps you've lost your loved one and now you don't have that sort of touch. And yet that is so vital because that touch, even holding hands, releases oxytocin. Yeah. Having a hug. My mum loves to have a hug, even more as she's got older. She'll have a hug and she'll just hold on to somebody. Yeah. And the reason she's doing that is because her limbic system, whilst that's happening, is giving her little squirts of oxytocin. Yeah. And the purpose of oxytocin is to make us bond, is to create these social alliances.
I think
it creates belonging.
Yeah. So one of the things... So right now, if you're listening to this and it's a few years down the line, we're currently in a lockdown over a pandemic. And this has actually been one of the reasons why people have been feeling quite lonely and quite down is because we've lost the social interaction with each other. We're not allowed to go near each other unless you're in your own household. We have to stay 2 meters apart. And usually, we're hugging friends. As soon as you see someone, you hug them. You shake their hand. It breaks down barriers. And so there isn't this hit of oxytocin, which is happening in our society at the moment. And that's causing a bit of a problem, I think.
And if you don't, if like with a child, if you don't provide a child with hugs, with tactile, if you look in the animal kingdom and you look at the way a gorilla, for instance, is with its young, it's very hands-on.
Picks the mitts out.
And all of that is creating these oxytocin bonds. Yeah. And that helps to create a balance in a child. It socialises them, helps them to become confident, competent social animals later on. It's oxytocin that makes us want to belong to a group. Yeah. So if you think anthropologically, why is this so important? It's because if you're not part of a group, if you're out there on your own, in a primitive situation, you're going to get picked off. The lion will attack a small child out by itself, but won't attack a big bunch of, a whole tribe. It won't do that. Yeah. Oxytocin, your limbic system, rewards you when you make the effort of creating social alliances because that is more likely to cause you to survive. It's more likely to help your gene seed to survive as well, because you're then more likely to find a partner, a suitable partner, and then have children. So social alliances can entangle your cortex in a whole heap of trouble, but oxytocin makes it feel good.
Yeah, that's cool. Also, oxytocin, giving a compliment to someone.
Yeah.
Paying someone a compliment actually releases that same amount of chemical. So if you're feeling like down in the dumps, text someone, tell them how much they mean to you, and you'll make yourself feel better over it.
There's a study done a couple of years ago, and it's the only one of its studies done. It's been very, very widely known, and there's a Buddhist monk, and he's spent the last 10 years praying the wellness prayer, which is the prayer is, may they be well, may they be happy, may they be free from suffering. It's a prayer which is throughout all religions, sort of share this same prayer in many ways. And by focusing on individuals and praying that for them, they've examined his brain and they've found, not just in him, but in many, many others, that those feelings, that prayer, actually releases oxytocin, because it's releasing that, it's rewarding you with creating social connection and social contact.
Yeah, that's cool.
And when you receive a compliment, it does the same thing.
Yeah. Number
4.
4.
Serotonin.
Serotonin,
yes.
Serotonin. So serotonin is actually probably one of the buzzwords that you've probably heard with the brain chemical, probably a little bit more than the other ones. And serotonin is the mood stabilizer. It's the chemical which stabilizes the mood. And for those, obviously, sometimes who suffer from depression, there's a lack of serotonin, which is the chemical release in the brain. But what we're looking at today is actually naturally creating that serotonin reaction to actually stabilise our mood.
Yeah, if dopamine is a sudden hit, serotonin is a much more steady state kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's, in essence, it's that sense of pride, that sense of respect, that sense of arrival, that sense of being at the centre instead of the periphery.
Kind of feeling a bit content.
Yes.
Yeah, that
yes. It's the peaceful chemical, if you like.
Yeah.
So laughter, again, brings this about. The reason meditating does that is because to meditate or to pray is to be silent and quiet in an area where you're by yourself. So you must feel safe in that area. All your basic needs are probably met. There's a lack of anxiety because you're probably not hungry. It's ever so hard to do that when you're hungry. And then you meditate, and by meditating we release serotonin.
Yeah. When we say meditating, for those who have never done that before, you're shutting out all the different things which try to get your attention and focusing on one thing.
Yeah, what you're doing is you're pulling away from the cortex, your rational brain, which is just looking for the next danger, the next problem, the next issue.
Yeah.
And you're just focusing down on something which is much more central and much more essential. Yeah. So something like just walking in nature can be a huge serotonin boost.
Oh, the trees.
Yeah. So trees are able to boost your serotonin. There's something about our limbic system which rewards us when we take time to slow down and walk in nature.
Yeah. Being in the sun.
Yep.
Being in the sun, so actually getting some sun exposure, the vitamin D, as it were, vitamin sun, that will release that exactly the same chemical.
Exercise will do the same.
Yeah.
So can you see the connection here? All these chemicals reward us for doing things that are actually generally good for us.
That's true. Apart from eating donuts.
Yeah. And this is why dopamine can be a bit of a bad boy here. Because
he's the black sheep of the family.
Dopamine will also give you a hit when you're playing Crash Bandicoot or when you're playing
Call of
Duty or something. When you're playing Call of Duty and you shoot the enemy and you kill them, you get a sudden rush of dopamine. Now, it's the same rush of dopamine as when you find a donut and eat it. It's exactly the same. So dopamine is not moral. And that's something to really understand about all these chemicals. They're totally amoral. As long as it's going to help you survive, they don't care. So the cortex is quite helpful. It's not that it's not helpful. Yeah. You need the cortex to help you evaluate.
To balance out what the limbic system
actually, now I have too many calories.
Yeah.
The cortex has to come in and say, okay, now you need to stop eating. The problem is your limbic system is, I want more donuts. And your cortex is saying, whoa, you've already had 7 Krispy Kremes. You need to call it a day.
Whoa.
Just one more, says the limbic system. And there's this battle between the two. But if dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin and endorphins are all balanced and are all working correctly, it's much, much easier to not rely on the bad boy dopamine. You know, dopamine is like the aspirin. It's like the go-to chemical.
Yeah.
Especially when we're depleted in oxytocin, when we live these separate lives, totally disengaged. If you like, oxytocin is released when we have good social involvement. Yeah. But today, we cut off our social involvement and we live separate from everybody else. So we can't get our hits from there. Serotonin gives us a hit when we're connected with the rest of the universe and with nature and with the trees and with creation and with the animals. Serotonin is released, but we're not. We live in these blocks of flats or in city blocks where there's no trees and there's no nature and we have no connection with that. And so serotonin is removed from our limbic system, no longer gives us a squirt of serotonin. So we're left with endorphins, which are painkillers.
Yeah.
Now, if we don't exercise, we're not going to get the endorphin hits. So that all we're left with is the dopamine hit. And the easiest way to get a dopamine hit is to eat.
Yeah. Well, we hope this has been educational for you today on hacking into the happy chemicals. Now you know what we're dealing with.
I've got some more to say.
Oh, sorry. Beg your pardon. He's got more to say.
Don't cut me off now.
Oh,
I'm in full flow, babe.
All right, then.
Yes.
Off you go.
Go to the naughty chair. Your dopamine got excited there, didn't it? Because this is the key thing to really understand here, is how neural pathways are formed. Because if once you know where the pharmacy is in the limbic system, whenever you need a hit, your body's going to want to go to the pharmacy. And that's called a neural pathway.
Yeah.
It's a way to get the reward.
Yeah.
So, for instance, a child is told, if you're good, I will give you sweets.
Yeah.
So I will give you a donut. Mm-hmm. So it knows, it eats the donut, it gets a dopamine hit. It then says, now next time I want the dopamine hit, I need to be good.
Yep.
If I'm good, I'll get the donut, I get the dopamine hit. And a neural association is made between being good and getting a donut. Yeah. Now when we're older in life, that neural pathway is still there. It's like, imagine a track which goes through the wilderness or through the woodland, and it's a well-worn track. If you want to get a dopamine hit, where are you going to go? Down the path or beat your own track? Mm-hmm. You're going to go straight down the path. Yeah. The path has been worn for many, many years in your life that if you're good, you get the donut. Now, have you been good today? Yeah, of course I have. I did this. I cleaned the house. I'm going to reward myself. Sit down with a cup of tea and a donut.
I deserve it.
Yeah. I did my tax return today. I'm going to reward myself. I'm going to sit down with a cup of tea and a donut. Yeah. So can you see how these pathways dictate our future?
Quite powerful.
So we have to learn how to change these pathways. Now, the scary thing is that most of our neural pathways to the pharmacy are developed and are complete by the time we're 7 years old.
Wow. That's embedded.
It is.
Yeah.
Now, whilst that might be helpful for a 7-year-old, they're not always helpful, the same pathways, when you're 25.
I guess it's kind of been more embedded, though, within the limbic system, isn't it? Rather than the cortex.
Yes.
So when you're younger, your cortex really hasn't even developed.
No.
So it's actually embedded in the wrong side of the brain.
And so you can find people who are incredibly smart who still have serious food addiction. Yeah. It's not a sign of being stupid or anything like that.
No.
It's to do with how those neural pathways were formed when you were a young child.
Yeah.
And so by changing, we say if you change a habit for 40 days, you change it for life.
Yeah.
And what you're doing when you change a habit, you're changing that connection that your cortex has with the pharmacy. You're making a new road that says, actually, in order to get that dopamine hit now, I'm going to take a different pathway. Or I'm not even going to go for the dopamine hit now. I'm going to go for an oxytocin hit.
Yeah.
Or in saying, I've done something really good, I've cleaned the house, that itself can be a dopamine hit.
Yeah.
I've done something that's conducive to my health and well-being. That should be a dopamine hit. I don't need to connect it with a donut in order to feel good. So that's a big thing to understand, and we can look at ourselves, and perhaps you might want to do this after this podcast. Just examine yourself, and when you start having cravings, start saying, okay, what chemicals are being released here? You know, I've got a sudden release of anger. Yeah, what's going on here? Well, probably dopamine and endorphin and adrenaline, and it's all being released to prepare us for battle. So endorphins are being released as a painkiller, which numbs us. dopamine is being released, and adrenaline is being released, and now we're acting out of animal instinct, out of our limbic system, and our cortex, our rational mind, is gone.
Yeah.
Road rage, nothing rational about it.
No.
That enables us, perhaps, in a different
Think on your
situation
feet.
to survive.
Yeah, it's very quick thinking, isn't it?
It is.
In this situation.
So I hope that has been a helpful to you. Trying to understand.
We've actually ended now.
We have. How you can hack the happiness chemicals in your brain and make them work for you instead of being a slave to your limbic system. Recognise, thank God for your limbic system, thank God for the chemicals that are there. We're not trying to live without these, we love these things, but we want to learn how to access them in a rational way, in a helpful way, and in a way which is conducive to long life and health.
So we are Tojo Fitness. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast on fitness, and we will be back with you next Thursday for another instalment of our podcast. Have a fab weekend, people. Sending all the love.